All right, so when we're talking about fueling, we're talking about fueling before, fueling during, and fueling after your training or your performance. And so really, when we're talking about performance, we need to do all three. We need to fuel before, we need to fuel during the performance, and then we need to fuel afterwards to recover. If it's your race day, the least important one is the after. The before and the during are going to be essential to your performance on the day. The after is really going to be important for how well you can perform the next day or soon after. Right? Because as we talked about, there's two types of fatigue. There's the mechanical fatigue from the impact force, and there's the metabolic fatigue from how many calories you've used and where those calories came from. All right, so when we talk about endurance performance, carbohydrates is going to be essential. It's going to be the king, because really what carbohydrate is doing, that carbohydrate is got to be there because remember, fat has to go through 2 cycles in order for us to get energy from it. You get a lot more energy from it, but you have to go slower to get energy from fatty acids. If you're going to go fast, and we're talking about performance here, we're talking about racing, we're talking about trying to perform your best, you need to go fast. And when we talk about going fast, that means you're going to need to use carbohydrate. All right, so when we talk about carbohydrate, we're going to talk about the days before, when you're going to increase or maintain your carbohydrate intake as you're decreasing your training, because remember, you want to perform your best on this day. So if you train super high the day before, the likelihood of you performing your best isn't really good. So what you would do is you would train really high early, and then as you get within a week of getting to your race day, now you're going to decrease the amount of training you're doing so that your body is mechanically recovering really well, so that on the race day your muscles and your joints and your tendons are really ready to go. And as you decrease the amount of activity you do and you maintain or increase your carbohydrate intake, now what you're going to do is you're going to store a lot more muscle glycogen. And as I'll show you in a second, that's going to be essential for your performance at a fast level. Then we get to race day, and for morning events or for other things where you're trying to make sure that you're ready to go, about 90 minutes before your competition, you're gonna want to take in about 300 calories of carbohydrate. The reason for this is to replenish the glycogen in your liver so that your liver is ready to go. 90 minutes before, because then it'll have cleared your system. There's not going to be any problems with digestion and absorption. And really, if you take it too close to the event, within 1 hour, specifically within 30 minutes, now what's going to happen is, unless you're super nervous about the event, now what's going to happen is you're going to take in the carbohydrate, you're going to have this insulin spike, the insulin's going to store all the carbohydrate, and then you're going to feel like you're droopy and draggy. Okay? Your performance is going to go down if you take carbohydrate too close to the beginning of your performance, your race. All right? So you want to take that at least 90 minutes before so it has a chance to get into your body and replenish the glycogen in your liver. All right, so let's take a look at how we would carbohydrate load. So this is the first study. This is a study, this incredibly famous study by Bergstrom. And the reason that it's famous isn't as much because of what they showed, which is that carbohydrate was important. It's that what they did in order to show that was they invented what's called the Bergstrom needle. And the Bergstrom needle looks a lot like this. So this is a pen, and you see that little hole in there? Now what you do is you put a tip on this, you have it come to a point, you put a little window on the side, and that's the needle that they used in this. And then what they do is they stick it into a muscle, bam! And then they would apply a little bit of suction, and now what would happen is that big whole thing, you've got that little window in the side, you apply a suction, it sucks muscle into it. Then you've got a little chopping device, and the little chopping device goes right into that and it cuts the outsides. And so you bring it out of the muscle, you push it out on the table, and you've got about 100 milligrams of human muscle that you can analyze. Okay, so this is why this study is super famous, because they created the first biopsy needle. Okay, so now what happens when you look at the muscle if you're on a standard mixed diet, if you're on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet, or if you're on a high carbohydrate diet? What you can see is the amount of glycogen stored within your muscle goes down when we're on a high fat and protein diet. And then when you increase the carbohydrate content of the diet, you see this nice big increase in the content of glycogen. All right, so what does that have to do with performance? Well, what they then did is they had those same individuals go and exercise as long as they could at a moderately high workload. And you can see that on the mixed diet, they went about 120 minutes. On the high protein, low carbohydrate diet, now they're going about 50 minutes. And on the high carbohydrate diet, now what they're doing is they're able to go about 170 minutes. And this is because one of the things that stops us from performance at a high level is when we deplete glycogen that's in and around the myofibers. Okay, so we're going to deplete the glycogen that's in those muscle cells. And so as glycogen depletion increases and as our glycogen levels drop, our performance drops because we have to then shift to fatty acids, and that means we have to move more slowly. All right, so this is probably then followed up by one of the better, again, researchers in the world, one of the people who did more biopsies than anybody else in the world, and that was Bengt Saltine. So Bengt spent one whole day where all he did was he flew into La Paz in Bolivia at this super high elevation near almost 2 miles up, and they wanted to know the adaptations that happen at skeletal muscle. He flew into the airport, he stayed at the airport all day and basically took a few hundred muscle biopsies from different people during that day. Again, that's the kind of thing that you could do at the time where he probably took tens of thousands of muscle biopsies over his life. All right, so now what is this study and how did he look at this? So again, he's looking at this special regimen, which is the high carbohydrate regimen versus the mixed diet. And now what he's going to do is he's going to do a 37-kilometer race. Very long race. And you can see, actually it might have been shorter than that because 150 minutes, 125 minutes. So these are it's about 37 kilometers. That's right. Okay, so what they then did is they took these individuals, and these are different athletes that have different VO2 maxes, but they're still pretty high VO2 maxes. They either did the special diet or they did the mixed diet, and they did it in a random order. But you can see that the special diet is the first number and the mixed diet is the second number. So the important thing that you want to see is if you look at the overall time here, the time, if you're on the special diet, the carbohydrate-rich diet where you're going to increase glycogen, the time to complete your 37 kilometers is 135 minutes. And if you took the mixed diet, your time to complete it, even though it's the exact same people, is 8 minutes longer. So you're beating yourself by 8 minutes if the only thing you've done is increase the amount of glycogen in your muscle. Let's take a look at what happens in the muscle before they went on the special, before they started the race. They have relatively high glycogen levels. After they finish the race, they have a relatively low glycogen levels. So they've decreased the glycogen level by about a factor of 2. But if you look at the mixed diet, now look at how low the glycogen is at the start. You're at 17. So just by going onto the glycogen-rich diet or the carbohydrate-rich diet, they've doubled the amount of carbohydrate. They've doubled the amount of glycogen in the muscle. That means that they can use much more glycogen. So they're using 16 grams per kilogram body weight, per kilogram wet mass of muscle versus 12. Okay, so this is a really, really big difference. So you're getting an 8-minute difference. That's not even the difference between first and last place in a race, or first and 10th place in a race. That's like the difference between, at an elite level, this is the difference between making an international meet and not even making your national championships. If you're a long distance runner and you're finishing 8 minutes behind the leader, you're not going to be an elite long distance runner. Okay, so simply shifting your diet to make it more carbohydrate rich has increased your performance in every single individual. You can see some individuals like RG improved a lot. This individual improved 14 minutes on the special diet, whereas PB only improved about 1 minute. So let's take a look at them really quickly. Because if we look at them, look at the difference in glycogen. So here, what we've got is we've got PB. Their glycogen before is 64. Their glycogen on the mixed diet is 19. So they've added a huge amount of glycogen. Now let's take a look at RG. RG's gone from 13 up to 33. So they've still added a ton of glycogen, but nowhere near as much. So maybe that could explain why their performance improvements were different. And you can see that RG is here, PB is here, and you can see that RG started having better performance from like the second or third intervals. It was a 30-kilometer race. not 37. So very early in the race, RG was having a really good time. They were really performing much better on the special diet. PB only started to perform better about between 5 and 6. So between the 5th and 6th region. And so what this is telling us is that if you start with a ton of glycogen, more like PB did, you're not necessarily going to improve as much. And really what happened was exactly this. So for PB, they loaded 45 more grams per kilogram of muscle of glycogen. So they put 45 grams of glycogen per kilogram of muscle. Each gram of glycogen brings with it 3 grams of water. Therefore, he put on about 180 grams of water per kilogram of muscle. Assuming that muscle is going to make up about 45% of your body mass, that means that he has 29 kilograms of muscle. And that translates, this 180 grams per kilogram, translates to about 5 kilograms of extra weight. In reality, the difference between body weights between the two races for PB was 3.1 kilograms. So even though, and that's probably because he didn't store a lot of extra glycogen up in his upper body, he only stored it in his lower body. So so you can take the glycogen away from half of his body, and that's probably why we only see this 3.1 kilogram increase in weight. But that's still almost 7 pounds that he's heavier. And basically, when they asked him afterwards how his performance was, he said, man, at the beginning it felt really heavy, and I felt like it really slowed me down. And this is something we see in elite athletes all the time. If you go to the Tour de France, these guys are riding 200 kilometers a day up these like 900-degree hills. They're just incredible. You're going as hard as you can all day long for 3 weeks. So what do you think they do? They get up in the morning, they've just eaten to recover all of this glycogen that they used up yesterday. They go to sleep, they wake up the next day, they're going to have another 200 kilometers of bike riding today. So what do? A lot of them wake up and they get on a bike trainer and they bike. And the reason for it is that they've taken up so much glycogen into their legs that their legs feel really heavy. Because with that glycogen has come water. So they really feel like their legs are super heavy. So they'll bike, they'll get rid of a little glycogen until they feel like their legs feel like they're not heavy. They feel like they have their pop again. All right? So what this tells us is that we want, before training, before race day, we want to build up our glycogen stores. And the way that we're going to do that is, as we taper the amount of training that we're doing, we're going to keep our carbohydrate content high. 55 to 60% of our dietary intake is going to be carbohydrate during those times. And that's really going to allow us to pack on a lot of glycogen into the muscles where we're going to need it for our race.